The New York Times, Ukraine strikes into Russia with Western weapons, official says. The official said Ukraine had destroyed missile launchers in the Russian region of Belgorod using an American-made rocket system. So we've got these videos that have been coming out of Russia. Just days after the Biden administration granted permission for Ukraine to fire American weapons into Russia, Kyiv took advantage of its new latitude, striking a military facility over the border using a U.S.-made artillery system, according to members of Ukraine's parliament. This has already been reported on in Russia as well, confirmed by both sides. Yehor Chernev, the deputy chairman of the Ukrainian parliament's Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence, said on Tuesday that Ukrainian forces had destroyed Russian missile launchers with a strike in the Belgorod region about 20 miles into Russia. Ukraine's forces used a high-mobility artillery rocket system, or HIMARS, he said. Confirmation coming from ABC News as well. And then let's see, we have this. This is an important context from Politico. Biden secretly gave Ukraine permission to strike inside Russia with U.S. weapons. Here's my favorite part. Here's my tweet. Western forces have begun direct strikes on Russian territory. Russia already warned this would be a declaration of war and they would retaliate. We ended up getting this beautiful community note, which read, "This is misleading. Western forces have not begun strikes inside Russia. Ukraine is conducting strikes inside Russia using Western American-supplied weapons. Referring to Ukraine as Western forces would not be accurate. Ukraine is an independent sovereign country that can only take action if Joe Biden tells them they can." Yeah, nice try, deep state. No one's fallen for it. This is a new era. We are wise to your crackpot games, and we ain't playing around. Look. They're going in the media and they're saying this is not war. This is Ukraine's doing it. You have to be a special kind of stupid to believe that's the case. So when I look at these liberal pundits and they're just like, wow, look what Ukraine did after Biden gave them the weapons and the permission. Yeah, that means they're taking orders from Joe Biden. That's it. This could very well be the doorstep of World War III, or at the very least, a direct confrontation with Russia. Now, to be fair, we're already at war with Russia. So the question is, does this escalate beyond and become something more akin to World War III?
You can guarantee that Russia is going to consider this an escalation, right? Like what they do, I don't know. I'm not making any predictions about what they do. But inside Russia, you can absolutely guarantee that they're going to consider just the acknowledgement, right? Because there's all kinds of things that they probably know. And they're like, well, we're pretty sure they're doing this, but we can't prove it or whatever. Like all kinds of stuff happens like that when it comes to international politics and stuff like that happens all the time. But when you have something that is either uncovered and the administration or whatever country in question has to admit it, that makes a whole different ball of wax as to how the country that was targeted is going to respond and how the international community will accept their response. Because like no matter what, the U.S. is going to be like, no, you shouldn't do anything at all, blah, 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 no matter what. But what the rest of the international community is going to say is going to be different because of that.
Yeah, well, we initially saw reports about this authorization from Biden last week, but it was when the Trump conviction came out. So it sort of was like some media reporting on it, but for the most part, it was news that was reported without really being, I think, taken in by the American public. I don't really understand how the White House can defend being like, well, we're not being aggressive against Russia. We're just helping Ukraine out by telling them to use our supplied weapons and force against Russia inside Russia.
And then within days, they actually do it.
Yeah.
Well, we have this from Sky News. Kremlin official threatens war against NATO if Ukraine uses U.S. weapons against Russia. A senior Russian official says the country could go to war with NATO after Biden allowed some U.S. weapons to be used by Ukraine in Russia. So we have rescue workers at a site of a residence hit by a Russian missile in Kharkiv.
That was Friday also. It's not like this is something that they said last year.
This is Friday.
They said that this past Friday.
Quote, Russia regards all long-range weapons used by Ukraine as already being directly controlled by servicemen from NATO countries. This is no military assistance. This is participation in a war against us. And such actions could well become a casus belli. For those that don't know what that means, it means cause for war.
I find this very difficult to argue with, right? Russia has been clear the whole time. They don't want to see an expansion of NATO. They don't want the U.S. to help Ukraine fight against its forces. Like, they have been consistent in what they've said this whole time. Now, I don't agree with everything that Russia is doing. On the other hand, like, what did the Biden administration think was going to happen when they were like, no, it's fine. Go ahead and use these weapons. Russia will be cool about it. Like, I just don't understand the logic. And again, there's a certain level of arrogance, I think, coming from the Biden-Harris administration saying like, oh, well, we can keep telling the American people we're not involved. We're doing the right thing. We're helping Ukraine, when actually we have every signal that they are doing everything they can to escalate this war.
He went on to say it would be a fatal mistake on the part of the West to think that Russia was not ready to use tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine, and spoke of the potential to strike unnamed hostile countries with strategic nuclear weapons. How you guys doing?
I just think this is stupid. What is the leadership here doing?
It's a game of chicken. The West does not want to lose Ukraine. Russia does not want the West to take Ukraine. And so what we are seeing is the snowflakes in the avalanche. It's the grain of sands being added to a heap. The U.S. does not want to outright just dive straight in with sending in NATO forces into Ukraine and going to war with Russia. They're only doing what they hope they have to do, and Russia's doing the same. This means every time there is a one side is pushed back, the other side will escalate. Russia gets pushed back in the Donbass, then they escalate with artillery strikes and they start expanding. So then the U.S., NATO, and Ukraine, seeing them being the Ukrainian forces losing, a CIA official already predicting that Ukraine will lose the war by the end of the year. What does the U.S. do? They say, turn it up a notch. Deploy long-range rockets into Ukraine and tell them to strike in Russia to push them back. Russia is now likely going to respond with an escalation of their own. There's not going to be a very simple shot heard round the world. This war will be going on for some time, but maybe we're not quite at the point of a World War III. Maybe that will be if and when Russia fires a tactical nuclear strike somewhere in Ukraine to advance their position on the battlefield or to maintain their control of the Donbass region.
The administration, they want the best of both worlds. They want to be able to say we're not at war, meanwhile being at war. And it's just this language game of, is it Western forces or it's not that simple.
You point out the language game, and I think that's something that the American people are going to have to start deciding that they want to see through. You're going to have to go by actions and not really go by what people are saying. It's clear that
these are legal definitions around what constitutes Western forces.
Yeah. I mean that's my point. It's like they'll say that they'll use the proper terminology to say that they're doing things legally, and they'll articulate it in a way that should it be brought into a court, it would be tight as a drum and whatever, and then they're just going to do whatever they want. That is pretty purely obvious. So the American people, the only option we have is the American people have to decide that they want to vote a different way. They want to decide that they want to vote for people that will not behave this way.
Right, and to not get them further entrenched in foreign conflicts, right? Like, I don't think anything done under the Biden administration internationally has really been or I should say very few things, but definitely not in Ukraine or Israel. Like, I don't think we are benefiting the American people who we have an obligation to first. I think we're not even helping the Ukrainians in this point because we're just looking to escalate war, which always results in more death.
There's no honor in war anymore. It's just manipulation. I mean, yeah, not that there was. Fair enough.
Yeah,
but I mean, you can't just declare it. No one declares war anymore.
Europeans have some weird kind of sense of honor in war during perhaps like the colonial era in the United States. If someone waves the white flag, respect them and let them come in. Well, you kind of had to, because if you don't communicate, you can't end the war. How do you accept a surrender? So if someone waves the flag, you don't fire on them. And we try, but real war, when we're talking about people actually fighting for survival, existential threats, ain't no such thing as honor or integrity. No such thing as a war crime. They say, oh, Russia's guilty of war crimes. That means nothing unless you win. Russia's going to do whatever they have to do, and if they win, then it's the U.S. that committed the war crime. And then they'll say the U.S. to pay reparations or something like this. But the U.S., of course, being very far away from this conflict and it being on Russia's doorstep, of course, Russia's never going to stop. The NATO and the United States are not going to stop either. And so I don't know where this ends up, but perhaps this flies over the head of the average American. The reason why I get that community note on my tweet is because deep state shills are like, we can't let people know what we're doing, so we need to downplay this, but no one's falling for it. But the average person's on an X anyway. If Russia fires a nuclear weapon into Ukraine, there is no hiding that.
No.
That will be a shot heard around the world moment, and the U.S. government, Biden, whoever, will not be able to ignore it. Heck, maybe they're counting on it.
I mean, I think the same thing can be said from probably internal Russia perspective, right? It's really easy for them to point towards NATO's actions and say, look, they are specifically threatening us. I think of when they admitted Finland to NATO. That doubled NATO's border with Russia. And we were just supposed to act like Russia wasn't going to see that as a threat. Like, maybe Finland was right to join me. I'm not going to debate whether they should or shouldn't have been admitted. I'm just saying, like, everything we do to make NATO bigger on Russia's doorstep is perceived by a threat by Russian leadership.
We should abolish NATO because without NATO, there is nothing that will prevent us from behaving like we have NATO, right? If you say, hey, we're going to dissolve NATO, all of the countries that were in NATO can still have friendly relations, can still support each other with military action if they want to. You can still do all that stuff, but you don't have to have the organization that will inherently draw the United States into war if a member nation is attacked. And it is no longer the situation where the United States absolutely prevents aggression. Right. It is no longer the case that the United States, being an ally to a country, will guarantee that there will be no aggression.
Right.
There's asymmetric warfare. There's all kinds of ways to go after nation states nowadays that are not actually big military. So the United States does not offer the same kind of protection that it used to be, or the allying with the United States doesn't.
Thanks for watching this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to check out the live show Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. on this channel. Subscribe and we'll see you all there.